Good morning, Morai V'Rabotai, Bruchim Habayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are on the very top of Daf Nun Vav Amud Bet, the last Amud of the Masechta. Today's Amud is being learned as a Schut Refuah Shelema for Daniela Bat Rachel and Manzal Bat Saltanat Kol Taj, dedicated by Dan family. Also dedicated anonymously for Refuah Shelema of Daniel Moshe ben Farangis V'Avraham. Should have Refuah Shelema. Today's Amud was also being learned as a Schut for a proper Shidduch for David Chaim ben Ephraim, dedicated Vashraga family, and also Le'ilui Nishmat Betzalel ben Rafael ve'Esther, dedicated by Mahbubi family, and for Refuah Shelema of Sarah Bat Mina, dedicated by the Taban family. This Amud is also being learned as a Zchut Refuah Shelema for Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid. This week's learnings of the community has been dedicated by Mahbubi family. Mikdash itself, like the main, we talk about the main doors, and these are like large, massive doors. So that's the door. Those are the doors that we're talking about. Okay. Now the problem with that is that if you study the areas of halacha that talk about this, like Rambam in the Chot Klei Mikdash discusses this, and it's really a Mishnah. Mishnah Masechet Midot in the very beginning really discusses this: who was in charge of doing what, and there are 24 sets of doors in the Mikdash, all of which will be opened and stay guarded by Leviim. The Hakafat Delatot was not the job of Kohanim, was the job of the Levites, the Leviim. Aside from 3 of the doors, 3 out of 24 was done by Kohanim, and the main doors of the Mikdash are not part of those 3. Those were Bet Avtiras was part of it, Bet Hamokat was part of it. Those are the doors that the Kohanim opened and closed, but not the regular doors of the Mikdash. That was the job of Leviim. They stood guard during the course. It was a whole, Bet Mikdash was like a palace of the king. So everyone had their jobs, and the opening and closing of the doors was really the job of Leviim for the most part, aside from 3 out of 24 sets of doors, right? So be that as it may, it seems really from the Mishnah, the Masechet Midot, that those are the 3 that we are talking about, that the Kohanim had to open and close, but there were doors that it was job of the Kohanim to take care of, and because of those, we give them the extra schana. As we will see in the Gemara, there are at least 2 other things that they did also. They did Tamid Shel Ben Harbaim. They also did the Bazichin, right? The Bazichin were the Kelim on the Shulchan. Aside from having the 12 loaves of Lechem HaPanim, you also had Bazichel Levona. You also had cinnamon that was on there, and that was also a Niktar. That was done, Pashtut again, the way regularly the Gemara is learned, that was done by Kohanim of Mishmar HaNichnas, the incoming Mishmar as well. So there are things that they did, but the Gemara now picks on the Hagafat Delatot, Bischar Hagafat Delatot, because they kind of like finished up the job of Mishmar HaNichnas. That's why they would get the schar. Now, what's the obvious question? The obvious question on this? Well, when you are entangled in the Shabbat that they're coming in, it makes a lot of sense, right? Well, I'm coming in, I'm taking over your job, I'm doing part of your job. My job really starts from tonight, so I did part of your job also, I take part of your bread, right? But as soon as you zoom out, the bird's eye view of this whole thing is, well, take a look at next week's Shabbat. Next week Shabbat, I'm going to be in the same position of the outgoing Mishmar. I'm going to be the outgoing Mishmar. Now I'm the incoming Mishmar. Next week Shabbat, I'm going to be the outgoing Mishmar. So it's true that today I closed the doors that they opened, But guess what happens next Shabbat? I'm going to open the doors and I'm not going to close them. So maybe we should just even out everything, because I'm going to be opening and closing the same amount of doors when you look at the entire spectrum of a week. And instead of me taking, it's very interesting, even as it is, it doesn't make a difference in numbers. Because I am taking 7 chalot now. How many chalot am I going to take next week? 5. So besach hakol, how many did I get? 12. So why can't we just be normal and say 6 now and 6 later? What did you exactly gain over here, right? And this is the core of human psychology, right? This is an amazing, amazing thing. I think the whole Havdil, the whole credit card mentality is really mentioned in this Gemara over here, tucked away in 2,000 plus years ago, tucked away in the last Amud of Masechet Succah. The Gemara says in the name of Abaye an answer for that. But let's see the question of the Gemara first. V'nemale dal bedal. Why can't we just say dal bedal? I mean, you drop it and we'll drop it, right? You drop this cheshbon of extra too, and we'll drop the next mishmar also will drop it, and then you'll get the same 6 plus 6 instead of 7 plus 5. It'll be the same thing anyways. So Amar Abaye says no. Botsina tava mikara. The reason is the psychology of a person is botsina tava mikara. Now Rashi understands that botsina and kara are the same species of zucchini or dalat. When it's small, it's called botsina, and when you let it grow, it will be kara. So if you give a little attached to the ground botsina to a person, they prefer eating it now, here and now, when it's still small, than waiting for cash and credit. You much rather having the cash right now, even if it's smaller, than having something later on, even if it's going to be a little bigger. Tosafot asks questions on this, that really dalat and botsina is different species. So we're talking about like taking right now something that's small versus waiting, and they'll give you something else that's bigger in future. People deal with right now. If I could buy something right now and not pay for it, and I have to pay for it a little bit more later, we don't tend to think about future, which will be like the credit card mentality, right? But this, for them, even though that they in Cheshbon, they will realize that they get the same 12 lechamim, they much prefer that I'm getting more right now, especially compared to our friends over here, okay? That's considered payout. That's a payout for them, that they're taking more than the next guy, and for them it's considered payout. You know what? The Gemara is saying they're doing something, we want to pay them for it. We want them to be happy because they're doing something extra, right? The Gemara's question is, you're not paying them more. They're getting the same thing. So dal badal, like even out the beginning and the end of the week, and you'll be good. But says no, you don't get it. This is a payout, because they rather, in their mind, it's not a matter of numbers that they're taking the same 12 lechamim. The fact that they're getting the 2 earlier, that is a payout. So either you could say it that the fact that they're right now getting the same 2 earlier on, that's a pay, right? Or you could say that right now you're paying them more than the mishmar hayotze, and that by itself, that comparison is considered that we got more, even though that in number everything evens out, which is a tremendous thing. This is a instant gratification mentality, which is a reality of human life, and that's what's brought by Abaye. Abaye says, Amar Abaye, botzina tava mikara. Amar Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda said, it's not just the lechem apanim that they divide, but ube musafin cholkin, that they also divide in the korban musaf. Now, korban musaf is olah. What's left of it? Just the skin, the or. So it says, Rav Yehuda, the skin of korban musaf also they divide. So says the Gemara, Metive. Why? By the way, why is this? Because even though that the Korban Musaf is brought by the Mishmar Hayotze, by the outgoing Mishmar, because the Avodah of the morning of Shabbat, but nevertheless, the Mishmar HaNichnas has to be on top of the burning of all the parts to make sure all of it is burnt and so on. And oftentimes that is already in the afternoon when Mishmar HaNichnas, the incoming Mishmar, has taken over. So they kind of like do the Musaf together. Now, this making sure is not part of the Avodot of the Mikdash. Normally speaking, you wouldn't be getting paid for that. You're paid by dividing the or, because it's not a part of the official Avodah of the Mikdash. But so says Rav Yehuda, which says not just they would divide Lechem HaPanim, but they would also divide the or of Korban Musaf. Metivi, the Gemara says, wait a second. They asked in the Beit Midrash, how can it be? We have a Braita that sets up the divisions of how things were done on Shabbat as far as the two groups of Kohanim are concerned, the Mishmar HaYotze and Mishmar HaNichnas, the outgoing, the incoming Mishmar of the Kohanim. And this is how he reads. Mishmar HaYotze, the outgoing group of Kohanim, Mishmar of Kohanim, Osa Tamid Shel Shachar Umusafin. They are in charge of doing Tamid Shel Shachar and also Korban Musaf. Mishmar HaNichneset, and the incoming Mishmar of Kohanim, also Tamid Shel Ben Harbaim. They do the evening Tamid Shel Ben Harbaim, Ubazichin. And also they do the Bazichei Levona. There's, those Bazichim that were also sitting on the Shulchan together with Lechem HaPanim. The Haktara of the Bazichin is done by the incoming Mishmar. So it says, which by the way is very interesting because you see that Lechem HaPanim is not just arbitrary that is divided between the two Mishmarot. Part of it is done by Mishmar HaYotze. Part of it is done by Mishmar HaNichnas. Right? So they did the Lechem HaPanim last week, and now they're doing the Bazichin today. Ve'ilu Musafin Cholkin Lo Katari. This Braita talks about the two Mishmarot, and it says nothing about dividing the skin of Korban Musaf. It just tells me that the outgoing Mishmar is the one that does Korban Musaf. If they really have to divide it, it should tell me. Gemara says that's not a good raya at all. Because Hai Tana, says the Gemara, Bechaluka lo Kamairi. This Braita is not talking at all about the Chalukah, the division of who takes what. This Braita is primarily focused on who does what, not who takes what. See, in other words, the Braita is saying, you want to know how the Korbanot of Shabbat are done, the Avodot of Shabbat are done. The Mishmar HaYotze does this, the Mishmar HaNichnas does that. It's not talking about who takes what. And therefore, it's not a good raya. It could be that Mishmar HaYotze is doing the Korban, the outgoing Mishmar is doing the actual Korban Musaf, but the skin they divide. Could be. So that's not a question, says the Gemara. Amar Rava. Rava is the Makebe Patish. He says, wait a second. There's a different Braita. I'll show you a different Braita that does talk about division of things that they share and doesn't say the skin of Korban Musaf. Tara de Beshmuel. Tara de Beshmuel speaks about this. Ma'iri Bechalukah, it speaks about the division of things that they share. Musafin Cholkin no Katani, and still yet doesn't talk about anything about dividing the skin of Korban Musaf. The Tara de Beshmuel, as we learned in Tara de Bishmuel, Mishmar HaYotzet Ose Tamid Shel Shachar Umusafin, the outgoing group of Kohanim on this Shabbat, they are the ones who are Makriv Korban Tamid Shel Shachar. They are the ones who are Makriv Korban Musaf Shel Shabbat. But Mishmar HaNichneset and the incoming group of Kohanim, Mishmar of Kohanim, Oseh tamid shel ben harbayim, they take care of the evening tamid shel ben harbayim, and also the bazichin. So this thus far is the same thing as the previous Braita, and then this Tana de Bishmuel adds Arba'a Kohanim hayu nichnasin sham. 4 Kohanim would come there. Shenayim mimishmar zu v'shnayim mimishmar zu. 2 of them from the outgoing mishmar, 2 of them from the incoming mishmar. V'cholkin lechem hapanim, and they would divide the 12 loaves of lechem hapanim for the 2 mishmarot. Right? So this Braita, Tanat the Bishmuel, does speak about what they divided between the two mishmarot, and yet there is no mention of dividing the skin of Korban Musaf. That's like a checkmate, right? I found the Braita that explicitly talks about everything that they did on Shabbat, including the details of how they divided, but it does not talk about division of the skin of Korban Musaf. That is a checkmate. Says the Gemara, Ve'ilu b'musafin cholkin, the division, anything about dividing the skin of Korban Musaf, lo katani, is not mentioned. Tiyufta, the Rav Yehuda, tiyufta. That is indeed a checkmate, says the Gemara. Right? So therefore, what does it mean? It means Rabbi Yehuda, who suggested that aside from Lechem HaPanim, that's divided between the 2 mishmarot, the skin of Korban Musaf also is divided. That was checkmate. So who takes the skin of Korban Musaf? The Mishmar HaYotze, the one that does the actual Musaf, which is the outgoing previous Mishmar, is the one that takes the skin of Korban Musaf, as we expected it to be, right? So the Chidush, the novelty of Rabbi Yehuda was checkmate. Says the Gemara, Hanichnasin cholkin besafon. So we spoke how the incoming Mishmar divides what they take in the northern part of the Azara, and the outgoing takes it in the south part of the Azara, right? So if you remember, we spoke about the fact that there are multiple different explanations of why Safon is more chashuv than Darom, right? A, because that's closer to the Bet HaShechita. We mentioned all these 24 rings that they had. They were in Safon, right, of the Mizbeach, the Safon of Azara, and the majority of the Korbanot were done, the majority of the Avodot, the Kodshe Kodashim, Shechitatam Betzafon, right, the Holy of Holies, the holiest levels of the Korbanot were brought in Safon, whereas other ones were in other places. You see, Safon has been given a much higher status than that of Darom. And we also mentioned a beautiful insight based on Korban Netanel and Korban Aida in Yerushalmi, in Perek Halacha Chet of Yerushalmi, Masechet Succah, that just like he says, Kol Peniot Shata Poreh, Lo Yu Ela Derech Yamin, that when you have to turn, your turns should be Derech Yamin, always to the right. And we spoke about this in earlier on Gemara, that when the Kohanim went up, they would go to the right side, facing the Mizbeach all the time, and figuring out what should be done in what corner of the Mizbeach. This also says the Yerushalmi is the same story. When they come in, they're coming in from Mizrach. When you're entering from Mizrach, your right, if you're turning to the right, would be Safon, would be north, right? So therefore, the incoming Mishmar that's coming in from Mizrach, they would start their day, they would start their Avodah in the Mizrach, and the outgoing one they already have gone through, and they're coming out, and that would be from the Darom. So this, says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, Hanichnasin cholkin besafon. Why do you even divide them? We understand that this is more important, that's less important. Kodshe Kodashim, yes, no, beautiful. Why do we even do this? Says the Gemara, Kedei sheyiru she'en nichnasin v'hayotzin cholkin bedarom kedei sheyiru she'en yotzin. We want this to be clear. That's not just a bunch of Kohanim. We want the division to be clear, as we mentioned earlier on in the Mishnah. For instance, we want the outgoing Mishmar to know that they're the outgoing Mishmar and not come by mistake to partake in Tamid Shel Ben Arbaim, right? You don't want those mistakes to happen, so we keep them kind of like separate, that people see who is the incoming mishmar, and also the outgoing mishmar realizes that that no mistakes are going to happen in that sense. So says the Gemara. Now we're going to discuss this strange story of Bilga, right?
I'm sorry. Could we go back one moment?
Sure.
This may be a Shas-like question, just a refresher. When it's a complete refutation of Rabbi Yehuda, who said that they divide the height as well, and he's completely repudiated, and they say that that's what is his source for saying something like that? How could he be so wrong?
No, he's saying that just like the logic of what he says is a good logic. He says, well, just like Lechem HaPanim, you have parts this, parts that, by Korban Musaf also it's not fully done by Kohanim of the first Mishmar, the outgoing Mishmar. Korban Tamid Shel Shachar is done early in the crack of dawn, right? So by the time the Mishmar Hayotze, the outgoing Mishmar, goes out, that already is completely burnt. There's nothing of it that is assisted by the incoming Mishmar. Whereas Korban Musaf, which is in Shah Shvi, is much later, many hours later during the day. By the time it's already in the afternoon time, so by the time the incoming Mishmar comes, they still have to tend to the burning on the Mizbeach. So it's really done in the partnership. The Shechita and Kabbalat Adam, Zrika, all those things are done by the first Mishmar, but the making sure that it's burning properly and it's done and it's finished is done by the incoming Mishmar. So therefore, the logic would dictate that we should do both of them. The question really is, do we actually put that much weight on this? And if you find, this is again, Rabbi Yehuda is an Amorah, so if you find the Braita, which is from the Tanaim, that talks about this and does not mention it, that will tell you what we explained. We explained it as if it's Pashut, right? The logic of why it wouldn't is because that is not really an avodah. Correct that they have to go make sure that it's all good, but that's not considered an avodah in such a way that would give them the right to divide in the skin, the or of Korban Musaf. So that's really the debate. It's not a question on Tamid Shel Shachar because that is fully done by the time the incoming Mishmar steps in. Because that's already done early in the morning.
So he was at logical deduction.
Yeah, this is one Korban. Korban Tamid Shel Shachar is out of question. But Korban Musaf really is much later during the day. So it's not really only involving the outgoing Mishmar, it's the incoming Mishmar is very much involved with it. To make sure that's burnt and completed. Sometimes they have to go or turn it to make sure that all the parts have been burnt and so on and so forth. The question is if that's enough of a thing. Is that enough of an involvement? And the maskara is that that's not enough of involvement. Okay? So it says, now Bilga, we mentioned that this Mishmar, one of the 24 Mishmarot, was heavily fined by Chazal in a very embarrassing way. 3 different fines. Again, this is, if you want to study about the Mishmarot, you could take a look at the Divrei Yamim Aleph. Actually, it's very interesting. It's in Perek Chaf Dalet. That's how you remember it, okay? The Gemara in Eruvin Daf Nun Dalet says, if you want to remember things, you have to be Agmere besimani ve'adkere bededamile. You have to learn it with simanim, with signs, and then you'll remember it with things that are similar. So the 24 Mishmarot Keuna are mentioned in Perek 24 of Divrei Yamim Aleph, right? And there, the number 15 of the Mishmarot is Mishmeret Bilga, right? So this is one of the 24 Mishmarot. And it was heavily fined that they always were in Darom, right? They always were in the ghetto, in the less important part of the Chas V'Shalom. They're in Darom, and their tabat was locked, right? Their ring was locked, and their kabi was locked as well. They had to, according to Rashi, they had to beg to use other people's. According to other Rishonim, they just didn't have it, right? They didn't have a tabat. So says the Gemara, what happened with them? Tarabaran, Maaseh be Miriam bat Bilga. There was the daughter of this Mishmara, the daughter of Bilga, unfortunately, became OTD, right? Went off the derech. And she, Hemira data. Vehalcha veniset lesardiot echad. She went and she got married to one of the chashuve Roman generals, officials, right? Mimalchei Yevanim, not Romans, rather the Greeks, right? And in the penetration of the Greeks in the Mikdash, for that time that the Greeks, they ruled over the Mikdash, כשנכנסו יוונים להיכל, when they came in, הייתה מבעטת בסנדלה על גבי המזבח. She went on top of the mizbeach and she was kicking, stamping the mizbeach and saying, Amra, lucus, lucus. Lucus in Yevani is wolf. Wolf, wolf. Ad matai ata mechale mamonan shel Yisrael, until when you're going to finish up, eat up the money of the Jews. All these korbanot that are brought on daily basis. Wow. And you don't even stand for them when they are in trouble. Look at what has happened. We are ruling, the Yevanim are ruling over the Mikdash. The one time that they needed you, all these years of korbanot and nothing, right? She was mebazeh the mizbeach. She was mebazeh the whole concept of avodah, which is a big thing because this is the linkage. Our connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is through tefillah and korbanot. Right. So she said basically this whole thing is bogus, right? You just consume and there's nothing there. And when the Chachamim heard this, they said, Kav'u et tabata. So we are going to find this mishmar of Kohanim forever, right? It's going to be, their ring is going to be locked up. V'satmu et chalonat, their cubby is going to be closed down. V'yesh omrim, mishmarto sho'ai lavo, v'nichnas, yoshvav, achiv imo, v'shimesh tachtav. And they also said the reason was not really this whole story of the daughter of Bilgah, but the story was because this mishmar was not careful in timing, right? They were not on time. They always came late. And the brother of Bilgah was Yoshvav, and they would come and take over for them because they knew already what we're dealing with over here. They knew that Bilgah is going to come late, right? It's going to be Ashkenazi time. They're not going to be on time. So they were very much Persian time. They were on time. They came early. They took care of everything, right? So therefore, because they were disrespectful to the avodah that they had, I mean, you're going to be showing up there twice a year, right? Every 24 weeks, you're going to come there. So you got to do it right. Come on. No, they can't, always late. So Chazal said, you're coming late, knas, right? So two reasons. One is this story of Bilgah and the daughter of Bilgah, and the other story is that they were actually not doing their job. Yoshvav, their brother, had to do it, right? The other mishmar, the adjacent mishmar to Bilgah was mishmar of Yoshvav. So now, the Gemara is going to ask the obvious question, which is really going to lead to our last few lines of the Gemara. The obvious question is, their daughter went off the derech. It was a one-off, like literally, right? Pun intended. It was one-off. So you're going to now knas the entire mishmar, and forever and ever in 2025 we're going to be learning about Bilgah was horrible. Because of their daughter. What did they do wrong? Why did they get the knas? Because their daughter said such a thing and did such a thing. It's going to be a chinuch 101 lesson in the Gemara, tucked away in the very end of Masechet Succah, which we're going to, Be'ezrat Hashem, focus on in the days to come.